Over the past year, and even following this year, I've seen versions of the sentiment to be cringe is to be free or embrace the cringe. And even before starting this channel, I knew I wanted to participate in the conversation because for the longest time, I was living in my personal cringe prison. I had only freed myself from it recently by opening this channel 3 weeks ago and finally posting my first video after thinking about this since I was 14. And I know most of us have a goal to be more authentic and to embrace the cringe more this 2026. So I thought it'd be a perfect time to discuss this in a psychological lens. Disclaimer, I am not a psychologist. However, I graduated with a degree in behavioral science and I was also a research assistant to a PsyD, which means that I'm not pulling the information here out of thin air. I'm also aware that human behavior is reflective of the times that we're in. So if you see that there are studies that are more recent or are more representative of our times today, just feel free to comment it and we can engage in healthy discourse. Again, I'm not perfect, I'm not a psychologist, I'm just trying my best. Going back to the topic of embracing the cringe, I think most of this points to us being humans. We constantly monitor, adjust, and edit ourselves to fit in. And to an extent, that is normal. However, sometimes we take that too far and we lose our authenticity. So today, I want to explore the feeling of cringe. When did we start labeling things as cringe? Why do we perform acceptability instead of living authentically? And lastly, how do we find a balance where authenticity doesn't cost us our need for belongingness? Now I'm a bit closer to the camera because I want to read my notes and make sure that I don't forget any points for our video. First, we ask the question, when did we learn that something is cringe and why do we avoid it? Aside from seeing it on social media, the reason why I chose this topic for the video is because it relates to a question that I have asked myself for the longest time, which is, when did I start to perform? And after reflecting, I realized that the moment we're born, we kind of start performing already. There are expectations of us, although the scale is not big as the expectations that they have of us now as adults. But to some extent, when we're born, people are already looking at us and expecting something out of us based on their biases. It's almost like we're stepping into a stage without even knowing what a stage is. People are watching, trying to understand who we are and what we need and the roles we might play in the society. And if what we offer makes sense to them, we're met with approval. And if it's the other way around, people will call us inconvenient, confusing, or hard to read. Going to the topic of performing since we were born, let's have a baby as an example. So a baby cries because that's the only way it can communicate what it needs. And because we expect babies to cry, naturally the caregivers will respond to this with care. Crying at this point in our lives is accepted, even welcome, because it fits what is expected of us in that age. But then we grow up and we leave that bubble we have with our parents. We step into new spaces and suddenly realize that there are more rules, more audiences, new environments where self-consciousness start to intensify. For example, maybe at home you had certain rules. So of course, you've already learned how to show up according to the rules that were set by your parents. However, when you go to school, there are new expectations from your teachers, from your classmates, and it pushes you to adjust. And over time, we start to notice the versions of us that are rewarded and the ones that make people feel uncomfortable. And this is where the cringe gets introduced to us. Cringe isn't really about something being wrong. It's about an expression landing outside of what is expected in that environment. Let's say you like the color pink growing up and everything you have is pink, your bag is pink, your notebooks are pink. However, when you step into school and suddenly the norm there is orange and people hate pink, of course you want to be accepted in that new environment. You minimize your love for pink and start to say, oh, maybe orange is my favorite color. Developmental psychologists call this heightened awareness the imaginary audience. This is the belief that everyone is watching you. And this is specifically strong in adolescence. You know that feeling when you're a teenager and you think that everyone noticed how you look that day, or you think that everyone hyperfixated on something wrong that you did. That whole thing is the imaginary audience at work. Psychologist David Elkind found that teens tend to overestimate how much other people focused on them. And this is a part of what he called as adolescent egocentrism. This peaks in our teen years, but sometimes it doesn't fully disappear. When we enter unfamiliar territory as adults, whether it be a new job, a new city, or a new relationship, the same fear of being seen as wrong or incapable can come rushing back. And so does the feeling of being cringe. In unfamiliar environments, this self-monitoring actually makes evolutionary sense. Our ancestors needed community and their social groups to survive, because at that time, being cast out meant real danger. So over time, our brains learn to pay close attention to social cues, to notice when we might be out of place, and to adjust our behavior to stay safe. So what do? We find safer ways to stand out. We choose performances that are less likely to be perceived as cringe, and choose behaviors that we think are more likely to be rewarded. For example, we start being the academic achiever, or we start being the reliable one, the funny one, or the most helpful one. And sadly, these performances work because they get us validation, people admire us for it, and it satisfies our need for belonging. When you're all these things, of course, people want you around. So we keep performing, and slowly we learn that being cringe feels riskier than being true to who we are. Our attempt to be less cringe is a performance in itself. It's us concealing certain parts of ourselves in order to belong, even when it doesn't feel aligned with who we are. So before we talk about how to unlearn this, it helps us to understand where it comes from. There are a lot of psychological concepts and frameworks that discuss our motivation. But for this conversation, I want to focus on this one in particular, which is the self-determination theory. At its core, this theory says that we are most motivated and most fulfilled when we make choices that are aligned with who we truly are. And that alignment is dependent on three core needs. First is competence, which is feeling capable and confident in what we're doing. Two is autonomy, or the freedom to choose rather than feeling forced to do something. And the third is relatedness, or our need for belongingness. When all three are present, we're driven by what psychologists call intrinsic motivation. We do things because they feel meaningful, interesting, and it truly feels aligned with who we are. However, when one of these three needs aren't met, or if there's an imbalance, that's when we often start to seek external validation. We begin doing things for approval, praise, and acceptance instead of doing things because we genuinely like it. And what's so cool about SDT, or self-determination theory, is that for the longest time, psychological research suggests that the best way to motivate people is through rewards. But psychologists Desi and Ryan challenged that idea. In one of Desi's early experiments, participants were asked to solve puzzles. Some were paid for doing well and others weren't. When the rewards were taken away, the group that had been paid lost interest quickly, while the group that was rewarded kept going. External rewards can actually reduce intrinsic motivation. And this is exactly what happens when we try to be less cringe or to fit in. For example, you might start achieving academically because you genuinely love learning. But once that achievement becomes about the applause, about maintaining your image, or about looking smart, it slowly takes the joy out of it. At that point, you're no longer learning, but you're performing learning. And the thing about performances is that they require consistency. Once people know us as the smart one, or the funny one, or the responsible one, there is a pressure to keep that character intact. Like at this point, you've already created a brand. However, you've put yourself in a difficult position of having to maintain it. This kind of maintenance has a term in psychology which is called impression management. And all it really means is the conscious and unconscious ways that we try to control how we're perceived by others. The small edits, the self-monitoring, the quiet checking if we're coming across the right way or the wrong way to others. And when our level of impression management is high or constant, it often leads to the following things like increased anxiety and stress, emotional exhaustion, lower life satisfaction, feelings of inauthenticity, and paradoxically, shallower relationships. Because people connect with your performance and not you. In a way, this is such a cruel irony. We perform to gain belonging, but often what we end up is a version of ourselves that's already tired from the constant wear and tear and from all the tweaks that we constantly do just to fit in. It's sad because we're accepted but not fully met. And over time, this feeling of belonging can feel hollow because the version of ourselves that is accepted isn't always the version of us that feels the most true. And here's where things start to get complicated or a bit tricky because you can't just say be yourself and forget what everyone thinks. It's not that easy because that ignores something fundamental, that we're social creatures and we actually need belonging. So yes, some level of social performance is required. It's not us being fake though, but it's just our social skills at work. It's how we navigate different spaces. For example, starting a new job, being in a new environment, going through something vulnerable. These moments call for a version of caution and adjustment, and that's totally normal. It's not really a question of should I ever perform. Rather, it's a question of when does this performance start costing me myself. And this is where the feeling of cringe start to become useful because being cringe isn't the enemy or as bad as we think it is. In a way, we have to treat the feeling of cringe as data. It shows up right at the edge where the part of you that wants to fit in bumps against the part of you that wants to be real. Think about it. When do you feel the most cringe? For me, it's usually when I want to do something that's authentic to myself, but I have this feeling that people won't find it socially acceptable. And for you, maybe it's an interest you hide, an opinion you soften, a way you hold yourself back from fully enjoying something because you're worried about how it looks. The cringe that we feel, we're actually taught to smooth it over, to edit ourselves, to laugh it off, or to just stay small. But what if that feeling is actually pointing to something important? Which for me is that a part of you is just asking permission to exist. And the goal isn't to never feel cringe. It's to stop letting that feeling be the thing that decides what you do. And I want to relate this to a psychology concept called optimal distinctiveness theory. It suggests that we're always balancing two needs at once. One, the need to fit in, which is assimilation. And two, the need to stand out, which is differentiation. We feel most at ease when we're able to do both. When we belong to a group, but don't have to erase our individuality to fit in. This means that the solution isn't choosing between belonging and authenticity. It's about finding or creating spaces where both are possible. So how do we actually do this? How do we navigate the need for belongingness while reclaiming authenticity? First, sit down and audit your performance. Ask yourself, what am I doing for external validation versus internal satisfaction? A simple framework that I'd like to use when I'm auditing my performances is this. If this behavior got zero recognition, would I still do it? If the answer is no, I don't really stop right away. I investigate even more. I try to ask myself, why do I need that recognition? And is there a version of me that can connect this to intrinsic motivation? Next is to know the difference between self-abandonment and adaptation. Let's say you're a fan of Ariana Grande and you've been waiting for her album for quite some time. What do you do when an announcement of her new album drops in the middle of your team meeting? In this case, adaptation would be trying to collect yourself and not going into full-blown fangirl mode in the middle of the meeting and letting the meeting finish first before telling it to your favorite coworker. On the other hand, abandonment in this situation would be pretending unbothered like you're not a fan and hiding that interest because you're afraid of feeling judged. Next, we have to be intentional with how we offer vulnerability. Research on relationship formation shows that vulnerability creates deeper connections than perfection ever could. This doesn't mean oversharing with everyone. It means selectively taking risks to share more authentic parts of yourself. Next is to reframe cringe as data. Cringe often appears at the boundary between your authentic self and your performed self. Instead of avoiding cringe, get curious about it and ask yourself what would happen if you did that cringe thing anyway. Usually it's one of two things. One, people don't care as much as you feared. And second, some people judge you, but you will also find some people who really connect with what you had just shown. Both outcomes can give information about who your people really are. Next, remind yourself that belongingness is fluid. Remember that the communities that you're in can change over time. The people who knew you in one phase of your life don't get to determine who you are forever. As you evolve, naturally your interests will change. Your values will clarify and your authentic self will emerge even more. And when that happens, it's important to sit with yourself and tell yourself that it's okay to change communities too. Fluid belonging means recognizing that you can fit in different environments at different times with different aspects of yourself. The goal isn't to find one perfect community where you're 100% yourself all the time. It's kind of a group or a constellation of spaces where different parts of you can exist. And lastly, do things just because. This is a way of strengthening or reconnecting with our intrinsic motivation. It's time that we do activities because we really enjoy them, not because there's an audience or there's an outcome or for financial gain. Do junk journaling, continue doing your punch cards, post that content without thinking of what others would say. So here are my final thoughts. I really like this movement of embracing the cringe, and I can't believe that something that I've seen online is the reason why I am courageous to show up for myself through this YouTube channel today. It's like being a part of a collective too, and somehow it satisfied my need for belonging because there are people who are out there trying to get over their fear too and showing up, and that had a ripple effect on me. So now I'm showing up here as well. And if this is the year of you embracing the cringe too, I guess here's what I want to tell you. I think it gets to the point where hyper-curating ourselves cost us so many things. It costs us our joy, it costs us our energy, and sometimes it can even cost us our genuine connections. And sadly, if we keep doing this to ourselves, we might lose our sense of self as well. Yes, we need belonging and we need people to accept us, but belonging built on performance isn't sustainable. For me, real belonging happens when we become our authentic selves and allow people to know us and who we truly are, and they continue to stay anyway. And maybe the reason why we felt braver as children wasn't because the world was safer, but because it was a time where we haven't learned yet that we were supposed to be anyone else other than ourselves. I wish you luck this year, and I hope that this video gives you courage to embrace the cringe. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. Till we all bloom together.